What is good, everyone? Welcome back to the 99's Office Hockey Podcast, and we've got some pretty big news to discuss today. I've decided to make this video because I was genuinely in shock that this got done this morning, but if you didn't hear the news already, Kirill Kaprizov just signed an 8-year, $136 million extension with the Minnesota Wild, the team that originally drafted him, landing him $17 million per season. And I've seen social media going bananas about this, saying how Minnesota was crazy for doing this, but I am not so certain about that. So today we're going to be looking at every perspective surrounding the Kaprizov deal, whether that is his team, the market. We're all going to be looking at this today, so have yourself a seat and let's talk Kaprizov. So first of all, we've got to go over the headlines, because obviously this deal is game-breaking for the NHL. It is making Kirill Kaprizov the highest-paid player in the league, and that by quite a lot, surpassing Leon Draisaitl's $14 million contract that was signed last fall by no less than $3 million per season. As crazy as that sounds, and we need to go back memory lane to study how we got this far. So, earlier in September, we had reports coming out that Kirill Kaprizov turned down an 8-year, $128 million extension with the Wild, which would have landed him $16 million per season. And since those reports came out, we had trade rumblings going all over the league, whether it was sending him to New York to replace Panarin next season, or in Carolina to fetch them their first Stanley Cup, and that buzz honestly didn't stop until this morning when the deal got done. And to be fair, the owner of the Wild came out earlier this summer saying that he was ready to give Kaprizov the biggest contract in NHL history, which obviously has happened now. So let's go over the impact on the Minnesota Wild going forward. So, the Minnesota Wild are coming back from another early elimination in the Stanley Cup playoffs, losing in 6 games to the Vegas Golden Knights last season back in the first round. And since joining the team in 2021, Kaprizov has been a game-breaking force for this team. He is well over a point per game, and he brought his dynamic skating, shooting, and playmaking ability to this offense, and he's been pretty much the best player to ever wear a Minnesota Wild jersey. I think that goes without a doubt, and you had to keep him around to keep your franchise at least relevant, in my opinion, because the success in Minnesota in the first 25 years hasn't been all that great. But how much did that cost him? So obviously, this new Kaprizov deal is going to take a pretty heavy part of the salary cap space of the Minnesota Wild going forward, and as this team enters its contention window, that might be a problem going forward. But honestly, if you look at Minnesota's cap sheet, you'll notice that they've got some pretty good contracts on there. For example, Matt Boldy, who is a 70-ish point winger, also being great defensively, well, you've got him locked up for the next 5 years, at $7 million AAV. That's pretty good value right there. You've also got your top 2 centers, Joel Erikssonek and Marco Rossi, at $5.25 and $5 million for the next 4 and 3 years respectively. Those are also very good contracts. You've got Brock Faber locked up on the back end, and honestly, Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin are also on surplus value deals. So honestly, the core of this team is pretty set up right now at good dollar value. The only core piece that you might need to worry about is Philip Gustafsson, which you've got to sign next season. But with the new young guns coming into Minnesota, will that really be necessary? Let's go over that. This year, with some depth pieces being moved elsewhere, Minnesota has some young stud coming in on the offensive side of things, whether that is Liam Ogren, which was a tremendous producer for the Iowa Wild in the AHL last year, and you've also got Danila Yurov, which nearly put up Kucherov numbers in the KHL 2 years ago. Well, those guys are going to be playing in your middle six, and you might not expect them to win the Calder or anything, but still, they should provide a pretty important impact on this team right away. And on the defensive side of things, you've got your first round pick in 2024, Zeev Buyam, coming in for his rookie season. Obviously, his offensive talent is off the charts. He is a tremendous skater that will drive your power play as soon as this season. And back in net, you've got Jesper Wallstedt that had some pretty tough moments in the AHL last season, but before that year, he was on a trend to be one of the best prospects, at least in terms of goalies in the NHL for the upcoming years. So this team has some pretty good weapons going forward. You might say that some of those guys are gambles, that you don't really know how good those prospects are going to be right away, and honestly, I will not disagree with you if you say that, because prospects are always gambles, but some of those prospects have really solid track records of being great producers attached to their names. For example, Ogren was great in the SHL, in the AHL last year, and now he is ready for the NHL. So you might not expect those guys to be winning the Calder anytime soon, but still, they should have a pretty considerable impact on the Minnesota Wild as soon as this year. And you need to remember, those guys are on ELCs outside of Wallstedt, which is on a $2.25 million contract for the next 2 years. Minnesota Wild is still going to have a lot of space on their cap sheet going forward, so Kaprizov's deal is not the end-all be-all, especially with Ryan Suter and Zach Parise's contract now being off the books. They've got some pretty big margin to make moves going forward. So they're not strapped to the throat as we speak. They still can manage to acquire some players. I think they should have maybe been more aggressive this offseason. They pretty much only added veteran Vladimir Tarasenko, who had a pretty disappointing season with the Detroit Red Wings last season. But still, Minnesota will have a lot of manageability going forward. Because I've seen social media going pretty crazy about, oh, Minnesota's contention window is cooked. With the Kaprizov deal, they're not going to be able to do anything. And I cannot disagree more with that. Because as I said, they've got some manageability even with that deal, with all the ELCs of the young guns and the Suter and Parise contracts now being off the books. So they'll be able to move a lot of pieces, and while being pretty high on some of their prospects, I don't think their cup window is shrinked at all. They'll be a pretty competitive team for the next 5 years, and giving all that money to Kaprizov just shows how ready they are to compete to keep him around, because he is the poster boy of this city. He brought hockey passion back to Minnesota because, mind you, Minnesota hockey was pretty damn boring in the late 2010s. A really defensive game, not much of a star power, so keeping Kaprizov around was a priority, and going forward, I still think they're going to be able to add pieces to grow around him, and with the young guns and the internal growth that they have in the organization, I don't think they're in a bad spot at all. While this deal is not great for them, you might not get a lot of surplus value out of him, I think he's at market value. So if I needed to give it a grade, I would go B or B minus, which is about market value. I had the same thought about Leon Draisaitl last fall, so I don't think Kaprizov's deal is that bad going forward for the Wild. You might say that I've been glazing this deal for the past 5 minutes, but honestly, there's one big con that I see with it, and it is Kirill Kaprizov's injury history. Because last season, he only took part in half of the games of the Minnesota Wild, only playing 41 out of 82, but he was still going at art-level point pace, so you might not necessarily mind that. But he also missed significant amount of time in 2023 as well as 2024. So yes, he is a pretty injury-prone player. He has a track record in that category, but still, he is a game breaker for your franchise, and you need to take that risk. He is the poster boy of the city, and you couldn't let him go. So I've seen some reports and people going over social media saying that they should have let him walk away at that price. I don't necessarily agree with that. It is market value, and you needed to keep him around. You just couldn't let him go. He is the best player to ever play on your franchise. So yes, there is some risk concerning his injuries, but I think pretty much every NHL GM would have taken a shot at it if he became available, although he is a pretty injury-prone player. Now, the biggest impact is certainly on the market. Let's talk about it. Because it goes without say, this deal is completely resetting the market for free agents in the NHL going forward, and the 2026 class is looking pretty sharp, as you've got some players like Connor McDavid and Jack Eichel who are yet to sign extensions with their team, and now seeing Kaprizov getting $17 million. Could they ask for more? Obviously. And honestly, I think the probability of McDavid and Eichel staying with their teams is pretty high, especially Jack Eichel. They might ask for a lot of money with the salary cap going forward. This year, we're at $93.5 million, if I'm not mistaken, and it's going all the way up to 104 next season. So I wouldn't be surprised if I saw a Jack Eichel contract coming in at $15 to $16 million, although he is the cornerstone of the Vegas Golden Knights. He has a cup with them. I don't see him moving. He's still going to get a pretty hefty contract, mind you. And you've got Connor McDavid, the best player in the NHL, that is yet to sign an extension with the Oilers. And he's been saying recently, well, it's all going to depend on the performance of the team. So it all depends. Can they go back to the Stanley Cup Finals? Can they win the cup even? But really, I don't see him moving because legends like him don't cup chase as early as 28 years old. So I don't see him moving. But if he goes shorter term to assure movability come his early 30s, you might see him going for, I don't know, $17.5, $18 million on a 3 to 5 year deal. And if he goes long term, like 8 years, you might see that number go all the way up to 19 or even $20 million at the time, depending on the deals being signed in between, if that's extensions, for example. And another pretty big concern of mine is the defenseman class, because in 2 years, you've got the contracts of Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes coming to an end. And those guys are the best at their positions, and they'll want to be paid as such. And with Quinn Hughes' reports sending him to New Jersey to play with his brothers, how much do you have to pay if you're the Canucks front office to keep this guy around? That is certainly a question to be had. And on the goalie market, Shesterkin is way above everyone as we speak, but it might get pretty close now with the salary cap going up and players taking deals as big as Kaprizov. So obviously the market is now fully blown away, and it is anyone's guess to try to predict any contract coming in the next 3 to 5 years, because it's all shaken up now. It's going to be a pleasure to watch, and honestly, that's why I made this video. I am in shock that Kirill's contract was signed as early as this, and it's going to have pretty impactful impact on the storylines going forward this season, especially with McDavid. So if I had to give some final thoughts on this, don't be surprised if you see the Minnesota Wild going more aggressive in the next few years, trying to acquire some pieces to really get competitive in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and trying to bring back Lord Stanley to Minneapolis. I said bring back, but he never got there, to be honest. And with a player locked into a so heavy contract like Kaprizov, who gave his trust to your franchise, you want to fetch him a Stanley Cup while he's there. Because since he came to your franchise, bringing in some pretty dynamic offense, you really haven't been able to bring much success in the past 5 years. Minnesota have been first round exits for the most part, and you want to be more competitive as soon as this year, because if the plan fails and it all goes to crap, well, don't be surprised if Kaprizov comes in 3 to 4 years and just says, hey, I'm 32 years old, I want a trade out of here because it is not bringing the success that I want. He is that game-breaking of a player, and he can command a trade if he wants to. And if that happens, Minnesota is going to be in trouble. That's all I can say. But at that point, we're more into speculation than facts. We need to see how this goes. I personally am pretty optimistic about Minnesota's future. I'm not sure if they've got all the pieces to win a Stanley Cup. They need a true first-line center to play alongside Kirill, the Thrill. And still, I think they're going to be pretty heavy competitors in the next few years. So we need to see how it goes before we can really give a verdict to it. But honestly, that's a very risky deal. That goes without say. And the only option for us fans is to look at how it goes, and in a couple of years, if Minnesota wins a cup, we'll say it was a success, and if they're not able to be really competitive, we'll say, well, this was a tragedy. So thank you for watching. As always, your support is greatly appreciated, and from the 99's office, see you soon. Peace.